Why does intellectual property matter? It's like, Damon, why are you going on and on about intellectual property? It matters for a few different reasons. Number one, the person or the entity that controls the intellectual property, they can control how it's executed. In other words, what's created from it. Remember, intellectual property is the beginning of the execution of the idea, the proposed execution. The music is going to be played this way, not in your head, but it's going to be played this way. Whoever controls the IP, they can control how it's executed, when it is executed, how it's created, number one. They control who's getting paid from it. And they control how other people can use the IP. So how it's executed, how it's done, who's getting paid from it, and who can use the IP, who can partner with it. Let's start with number one. How it's executed means that, I'll give an example again of my book, The Complete Bring Your Worth Collection. Intellectual property is in my name. You know, the Library of Congress knows it's part of the Brown family. And again, part of Bring Your Worth TV, or just Bring Your Worth Publishing. So if I want to do an audiobook, I can do an audiobook. I don't need to get permission. No one needs, I don't need to check in with anybody, as they say. If I want to go ahead and do a third edition or second edition of this book, then I can do that. I can do whatever I want with intellectual property because it's wholly 100% owned by me, by Damon Brown and my company. So once you have and hold on to your intellectual property, you need the opportunity to do that. So that's one. I can do whatever I want with my book. And as of this recording, I own intellectual property to all my modern books, which I can't be more than thankful for, right? We'll get into that as far as owning your intellectual property. So that's one. The second part is you determine who's paid from the intellectual property. So if someone came through and said, hey, I want to go in and use your piece of music in the next Avengers movie. You're like, all right, great. I'd love that. But if you don't own the intellectual property, that decision's not up to you, which kind of gets into number three. But more importantly, with number two, whoever owns intellectual property determines who gets paid from it. You might not get any more money from it other than whatever you got to create the music if you don't own the intellectual property. I'll give a very brief example. Several years ago, about 30 years ago, 3 decades ago, a freelance journalist, and I've been a freelance journalist for a long time, a freelance journalist did an article about the top fighter pilots in the Navy. Great. Ended up being a very popular article. Hollywood, whether it's an agent or a movie studio, saw that and said, hey, that will make a pretty cool movie. Some stars got attached to it. They bought the rights to that article from Vanity Fair or whatever, GQ, let's call it GQ, from GQ. And then that became a $1 billion franchise once Tom Cruise got attached to it. True story, you can Google it. So the Top Gun franchise, not the movie, homie, the franchise, the toys, the music, shout out to Kenny Loggins and the soundtracks and all that. Berlin's Take My Breath Away, you know, for the 80s folks like me, you remember when that video was around? That was the soundtrack to the movie. All of that was attached to this Hollywood property. This Hollywood property was seeded by an article done, I believe it was in GQ. That GQ article was done by a contractor, someone like myself. Depending on the contract that the contractor signed, that might be all that they get. That might be it. They might have gotten, let's say, $5,000, particularly back then would have been decent, for a feature article about these top pilots. Great. That's not a $1 billion franchise, though. That's why intellectual property matters. So number two, if you own the intellectual property, you decide who gets paid. GQ, if they own the intellectual property, might be really benevolent. Be like, yeah, here's a few $1,000s, which isn't bad as a freelancer. But you're like, that's a Tom Cruise movie right now. Right. I'm taking my partner to go see it right now. What do you mean I'm getting $7,000 for creating this then $1 million franchise? But you don't own the intellectual property, not your call. Not your call. And that leads to the third dynamics of it, is that when it comes to intellectual property and why it matters, you cannot or do control who you partner with. So let's say you create a piece of music and I don't know, some people or organizations you don't want to be involved in. It's a pretty intense political time. Let's say you create some music and then a political campaign that you cannot stand, that you feel like they are against humanity, decides to use your joint. Do you own intellectual property? Ain't your call. You can complain about it on social media. You can fuss about it. We've seen that in the at least here in America in the recent political presidential campaign last year. Oh, so and so used this music in their campaign when they were on the road, campaigning, trying to get votes. Okay. And you see some instances where there's a lawsuit and it's like, no, you can't use my music. I didn't give you permission. And they're like, bet, you got it. And you see other situations where it's the same type of vibe, and you see the musician complaining on social media or on the TV shows being like, man, they should not use my music. Why are they complaining? Because they can't stop them. They have no legal recourse unless they own their masters, or in other words, their intellectual property. There's nothing they can say. So once you sign that away, it's a wrap. It's up to the, as they say, the behest of whoever owns the intellectual property. That's why intellectual property matters. So number one, you determine how it's going to be executed, what you can do with it. Again, I turned this into an audiobook because I felt like turning it into an audiobook. I didn't have to get clearance from anybody. I own the publishing company. I am the boss. I'm the manager. Cool. I own the intellectual property. No problem. I don't have to clear with anybody. If somebody else, which I partner with other folks in the past, I had to clear with somebody. And sometimes they said no. That's intellectual property part. That's number one, how you can execute it. Number two is intellectual property matters because that determines who gets paid. If you don't own the intellectual property, but someone ends up making buku bucks off of that intellectual property later, you don't have any recourse because you don't have those rights. And number three, intellectual property matters because that actually allows you to determine who you're going to partner with. So if some slimy organization or someone you don't rock with wants to use your music or your book or your words, your intellectual property, your execution of that, and you don't own the intellectual property, aside from complain a lot, yeah, you might be able to get a lawyer, but unless you sign the contract under duress. And the fact is that in all these cases, we usually end up signing a contract for a certain amount of money, a certain amount of access, a certain amount of leverage, and that's the trade-off. I'm emphasizing this and did the episode a few days ago about power moves that every artist can make, as well as today's episode is really about reminding you of your power. Like when you create something, you automatically have the intellectual property. It's yours. Things shift when we decide we're going to go with a traditional book publisher, or when we're going to sign this record deal, or we're going to partner with this organization that are going to distribute it. That's why, again, you got to lawyer up. I hired lawyers when I had very little money and I had little kids at home. But in the long run, end up saving me, again, tens of thousands. I cannot stress that enough. Barter with lawyers, use your network, get you a lawyer. Like get you a therapist, get you a lawyer. Because it's way too much at stake. My first major book took me 5 years to write. I was in my 20s. So a good chunk of my life on that book. We're sacrificing and trading way too much of our time for these things that we're creating, and to get reckless at the end to not own our intellectual property. That's not the wave, particularly in this environment. Again, I have a publishing company. This is self-published with my own little hands. I'm speaking to you on multiple platforms. This is from my own little studio. We have too much power and too many opportunities to use that power for good, to make an impact in the world, to get reckless with our intellectual property. Again, that's why I'm talking to you today. I can't emphasize it any more than that. A good place to start is my book with Jeanette Hurt. Shout out to Jeanette, fellow author, The Passive Writer. I think I have a copy up here. At least I should. There it is. Passive Writer, tiny little book. See our mean mugs on the back. Also self-published because, if how you gonna do a book about passive writing, you're not gonna publish it yourself. Come on, stop. 5 steps to earning money in your sleep. This is focused on writers. Again, my background is writing, 2 degrees in journalism. Shout out to Northwestern. This focused on writers, but I wrote it and Jeanette wrote it, so it applies to a lot of us as creatives. We talk about our passive income techniques. We give examples of other people, and we talk about how you can do it today. So check out the book. It is available right there. And as I talked about, here we go. As I talked about, there's an opportunity to create passive income with that. Again, think about the Top Gun situation. GQ didn't have to commission another writer to be part of this billion-dollar franchise. They just need to license it. They might be still making residuals today. I'm not privy to that information. I wish I knew, but I don't have any insider information on that. This whole episode, Maximize Your Passive Income, talks about it. I go deep into it. It's actually a compilation of a few different episodes. And yeah, I'm going into it. I have several different passive income pathways, if you want to call them that. And they all help me take care of my family and, make sure I'm good into my years. So please take advantage of that. Are you not sure why intellectual property matters? What are some of the stories you've heard about intellectual property? And when it comes to your creative career, or things that you've done, or even people within your network, what have you heard about intellectual property? And have you heard any stories of people trying to get their intellectual property back or going through that process? Love to hear your stories in your comments below. My entrepreneurial coach, Damon Brown, here to help you as a side hustler or solopreneur. Otherwise, a non-traditional entrepreneur. You're watching Bring Your Worth TV, Wednesdays at 1:11 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Vegas time. You can subscribe for free. I told you, it's getting hot over here. Yeah. Vegas springs are like everybody else's summer, so I'm starting to sweat. But I appreciate y'all rocking with me.